The relationship between Korra and Asami does not start out well. They're not antagonistic toward each other per se, but the relationship is primarily defined by how they're chasing after the same guy, Mako, who, let's be honest, is kind of an idiot, even though he's not a bad person per se. He does not deserve to be pursued by the moral and spiritual leader of this world and the heir to a vast fortune. It's a well-worn dynamic that attracted a lot of criticism at the time, and not wrongly so. While I will ardently defend the first two seasons of The Legend of Korra, they do rely way too much on love triangles, particularly Season 1. It's to the point where it actively damaged the show. Something tense and dramatic and fascinating would happen, and then Korra would say something to Mako, and Asami would become jealous, and it would all tend toward melodrama. Especially in Season 1, it's not so much a love triangle as it is a love polyhedron. Korra and Bolin, Korra and Mako, Mako and Asami, all of these relationships were explored to some extent. The exception was the relationship between these two. But as the wreckage of the contrived romances fell away, this bond became even stronger. In Season 3, they are left alone together because Mako and Bolin get split off from them, and Mako and Bolin spend a lot of time together. Their bond as brothers is explored far more deeply as they return to the city where their father grew up before leaving to try and make a life for himself. Season 3 is cited by a lot of people as being the best season of the show, and while I prefer Season 4 for a number of reasons, I will admit that Season 3 is probably the best structured season of this show, and the decision to split our group of 4 up into 2s was a very good one. I was far more invested in Mako and Bolin than ever before. The whole concept of them being two broke kids who escaped precarity by latching on to the Avatar was always kind of there, but the show had mostly relegated it to the background to focus on more melodrama. Here it is explored in earnest. They return to Ba Sing Se and see why exactly their father had to leave. Ba Sing Se in Avatar The Last Airbender is far from a perfect city. They originally think of it as a sort of utopia, but that facade is torn down once they realize it's rife with class division and, oh yeah, a secret police that brainwashes people. Somehow it's gotten even worse since those days. It's become a rancid cesspool of poverty and suffering. It is vastly overpopulated, and even physically speaking, the city is filthy. Mako and Bolin, making good on the dream their father could not achieve, now return back there and try and help those who were not quite as lucky. It's a really interesting thing that demonstrates the potential shows can unlock when they don't confine themselves to the dynamics they started with, when they prove themselves willing to evolve, to throw what didn't work out the window and try out new interactions. But what I love most is how much time we get with Korra and Asami together. The creators have said that the beginning of Season 3 was the moment when they decided to take this relationship in the direction it ultimately ended up going. And you can really see that in how much closer they became. In their conversation near the start of Season 3, wherein Asami pretends to be offended that Korra kissed Mako, and Korra is so instantly self-conscious and apologetic. In that one conversation, there is more closeness between them than existed between Korra and Mako in the first 2 seasons. The bond between Korra and Mako is pure hormonal teenage attraction. The interactions between these two are different. They really understand each other. Overall, the dynamic that exists in Korra's Team Avatar is much different from the one that existed in Aang's Team Avatar because their goals are significantly different. The original Team Avatar had one and only one goal: to defeat the Fire Nation. In Korra, in this more modern world, in this more complicated world, there is not only one major goal. Yes, she has to defeat a different villain each season, but that is only a means to an end. The larger question, by far, is deciding what the world she wants to live in is going to be. How does the Avatar respond to machinery, industrialization, the move away from the spiritual to the material, to the speed and dynamism of the city? People say the Avatar is obsolete in this age, so how do we respond to that if we're Korra and her team? How do we make the Avatar relevant to an age that is not like Aang's, where there are a lot more moving parts, where ideology dictates more than brute force, and where technology has increasingly triumphed over the magic system of this world, bending? The Avatar, the show decides, is not relevant to this world because they can bend all the elements. I mean, so what? So what, you master these different styles of bending? You're living in a world of planes and steamships. So what does it matter if you are traditionally the bridge between the spiritual world and the physical world? People have been losing connection to the spiritual world, and maybe a lot of that has to do with the fact that these two worlds are so separated, that in this mechanized age, the only way for people in the physical world to actually care about the spirit world is if they constantly have to interact with it on a daily basis. What's special about the Avatar is that they are not bound to any one nation. Their duty is to the world and to truth. Only the Avatar, Korra increasingly suggests, can transcend the factionalism that has overtaken the world in this more modern industrial age and point the world in a more positive direction. This is a lot for people to grasp. What I don't think a lot of people understand about Korra, even though the show is very upfront about it, is that this is a more internal and philosophical story. And it's not the kind of interiority that leads you to detach from the world, but rather the kind of interiority that leads you to actively think about the world and contemplate how to solve its problems. Think about what Toph says in Season 4 regarding how she can see the world better than Korra despite having spent the last 30 years of her life in the middle of a swamp. She's not what we would consider a traditional source of philosophical wisdom, but she can fill that role because she is attuned to the energies of the world. Or think about 19th century American transcendentalists like Whitman and Emerson and Thoreau. These men, like Avatar, were very interested in the East and Eastern philosophy in particular. They took from that philosophy ideas like how physically disconnecting from the world is not the same as spiritually cutting oneself off from what's going on. You're not just contemplating the Empyrean. You are actively with the world, even though you're physically apart from it. Korra has to lead that world forward in a time wherein it's harder and harder to know what exactly is right and what exactly is wrong. Even knowing the definition of balance is harder than it was in previous ages. I mean, balance, what does that mean? Does that mean just turning the world back to how it was? Was that balance? Does this conception of balance leave no room for change? I think about a part in the Avatar comics wherein Roku encourages Aang to not go forward in creating this multicultural world just because he clings to the idea that the four nations are supposed to be separate. Aang disregards that and follows what he believes is right, leading to that multicultural world, which is good, but then Korra has to deal with the consequences. She has to deal with deciding what balance looks like, and there's no one who can really help her here. This is why her being disconnected from the Avatars is so important. I know a lot of people don't like that bit, and yeah, it's crushing, it's supposed to be, but it is important for Korra. It symbolizes how, though she's not entirely cut off from the past, she cannot rely solely on wisdom from the past, because her problems are different from those of her predecessors. And they're not just of a different degree, they're of an entirely different world. They're problems of an industrialized as opposed to pre-industrial society, and there are a lot of complications that go along with that. This is a journey she has to go alone, but others can help her, and they can empathize with her struggles, and Asami proves particularly adept at this. Korra and Mako clashed because Mako wanted too much from Korra. He is a very type A personality. He wants to know exactly what's going on at all times. He needs a goal, and he needs to be in control. This leads to bizarre spectacles like when he rats out Korra to the terrible President Raiko, placing his duty to his job over his duty to the person he ostensibly loves the most in the world. Speaking of that job, he seems unusually committed to being a cop, considering that he displayed no interest of wanting to be such back in Season 1. Obviously, people change, and yes, it is possible to pick up sudden passions, but Mako consistently fails to realize that maybe Korra's problems are a little more important than his little minor issues. Asami is different. Now, I want to clarify, this does not mean Asami has to be the self-sacrificing one. It does not mean that she has to ignore her wants and needs and only focus on Korra's. But it does mean that she recognizes the pressure Korra is under. She recognizes how dang hard it is to be the Avatar in a world wherein even defining what the duties of the Avatar are is a difficult process. Again, past wisdom cannot help her. She has to seek another way forward, and she is very alone in this. So much in Avatar is based on cycles. I mean, at the heart of this, you have the Avatar cycle. And in a lot of Eastern philosophy, you have this idea that reincarnation exists. That energy is not created or destroyed, but rather transformed from old life to new life. However, that proves a problem here in Korra because you have what is a very resolute breaking from the past. To what extent do those old strategies and those old cycles even apply when the world is so different? Korra doesn't know for sure, but Asami will help her figure it out. She makes herself someone Korra can trust, someone who doesn't judge Korra, and Korra appreciates this. When Korra's sense of self is shattered, at the end of Season 3 by the trauma Zahir inflicted on her, she finds that she cannot write to Mako, and she cannot write to Bolin. Only Asami. Only Asami understands. Only she empathizes. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching The Legend of Korra. It's an extremely good show. It's really more concerned with asking questions and contemplating these enormous issues than providing easy answers. And yeah, I realize that makes it a harder watch than the original, but I think it's at least as satisfying of a watch. Even if you don't think so, I really do recommend that you keep rewatching the show. There is so much more that reveals itself in terms of nuances and little intricacies upon multiple rewatches. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.